translation of Natural Balagha. And I like the character of Imam Ali alayhi salam as it was presented there, because it showed somebody who was a very multifaceted person. If this guy is really such a wonderful model to have, and he believes in God, then maybe there's some way that you can find to believe in God again. The idea of God that I found in the Urfa and then later in Islamic philosophy was much deeper than it's a collection of signs that can lead you, that can help to guide you towards God. And so that was another big breakthrough for me, that figuring out how to understand the Quran. I found, even before I became Muslim, I started reading some of these stories from the poetry of Molavi and Attar, and I find it really fascinating. What motivates is love for God. Even people who have views that I take to be completely false, I believe that God can show His mercy on those people and find some way to guide them, even through their false beliefs. If anybody can go out on a dark night into the woods and look up at the stars in the sky and not feel awe of God, that person has a cold heart. I feel a lot of sympathy towards the atheists, because for many years I also had no belief in God at all. Getting rid of egoism, getting rid of worldly attachments. These are the things that make people behave in unethical ways.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نرحب بكم في سلسلة حوارات فكرية ومعرفية. In this interview, we are interviewing Dr. Muhammad Legenhausen. Haji Muhammad Legenhausen is an American professor born in 1953. He holds a PhD in philosophy from Rice University since 1983. He is interested in Western philosophy, Islamic philosophy, and one of the major areas that he focuses on is philosophy of religion, mainly philosophy of ethics. He also has a book and articles regarding the issue of religious pluralism and other books such as Jesus through the Quran and Shiite narrations, The Great Jihad, a translation of Imam Khomeini's spiritual book, and other books regarding the Islamic and Christian dialogue. He is currently a teacher and a researcher in the Imam Khomeini Education and Research Institute and a lecturer in Qom University in the city of Qom in Iran. So welcome, Doctor, and it's an honor having you with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
In this interview, we'll discuss topics related to philosophy of religion. But firstly, I would like to start from the early stages in your life, your personal journey towards academic and intellectual studies in religion and philosophy. How did it start? Did you start reading the religion and philosophy from childhood, or it began with an elder age?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I was brought up in a Catholic family, and I went to Catholic grade school as a child. And I suppose that my first introduction to theological ideas comes from my Catholic education. When I was around 11 years old, there was a cartoon program on television. And in the cartoon program, the host was making fun of philosophers. And I thought this was very strange, and I didn't have any idea who the philosophers were that this guy was making fun of them. So I went to my mother and I said, what is philosophy? Who are the philosophers? They had something about it on TV. And my mother said, there's a library 3 blocks away. Go to the library and find out what philosophy is. And so I did that. I went to the library and I picked up a book, checked out a book by William Ernest Hocking called The Types of Philosophy. And I remember I read that book and I thought it was really interesting. And I decided then at 11 years old that I wanted to study philosophy.
Great. So, and what about religion studies and philosophy of religion, comparative religion? What's the first insight towards that?
Well, when I was about 18 years old and went to college, I decided that religion was a waste of time and that I couldn't defend my religious ideas in a rational way at all. So I gave up on religion entirely. And that was from when I was about 18 until I finished until just about the same time that I was working on my PhD. When I started working on my PhD, I was teaching philosophy at Texas Southern University. And at that university, I had a lot of Muslim students. And the Muslim students were interesting to me, and I started talking with them about religion. And that's what really sparked my interest to look at questions in philosophy of religion more seriously, again, was coming into contact with the Muslim students. And as a result of that, when I was at TSU teaching there, mostly I taught several courses of elementary logic, symbolic logic, every semester. But I also was able to teach one course, whatever I felt like. And so I taught a couple of courses in philosophy of religion just because I wanted to explore the ideas. I wasn't an expert in philosophy of religion at all, but I used the opportunity of the teaching format to talk with the students about some of these things. But that's when I really started to get interested in philosophy of religion.
Doctor, I'd like to ask you more about your insight in Islamic studies and in Shia studies. So obviously you're from a Catholic background, but so what did you find very fascinating and interesting in Islam or in the Shia doctrine, or what's the first insight towards Islam which made you think really about conversion or about this other tradition?
Well, initially I was more attracted to Islam as a political movement than having to do with beliefs about God and things like this. So I thought that when I started teaching at TSU in 1978, so it was just the year before the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And all of the Muslim students were really excited about what Islam means in society today and what implications it has for how we deal with questions of justice and imperialism and all of this kind of stuff. And that was really interesting to me. So that was my initial attraction to start talking I mean, I talked to lots of my students. I had students who were Marxists from Ethiopia and Chinese students and lots of different, and all of them were interesting to me. You know, I like to talk to the students about how they live and how they looked at the events of the times. But the Muslim students at that time were really engaged with these issues. So I started talking with them, and I had this one student. He was a computer science student, and he stopped coming to class for a while. And then I saw him in the student center, and he was giving out some kind of flyers or something about the revolution. And so I said, I thought you were sick. What are you doing here? You know, you're supposed to come to class. And he said, oh, you know, in my country, they're having a revolution, and I thought it's important for the students here to understand something about it. I said to him, look, I will read all of your propaganda if you start coming to class and do your homework. And he agreed, and then we became friends. And then he finished his degree, and he went back to Iran, and he became Shahid. So I asked the viewers to say Fateh for Akbar Nujtahi.
Rahimahullah.
But that was the initial thing. And then I started getting so much interested. You know, I started going to, like if I was driving and I didn't have any place to go in particular, if I saw there was a mosque somewhere, I would stop and see what's going on and talk to people. And lots of people were very suspicious of me. You know, I mean, I didn't look like the typical Muslim guy. And every place I went, I just said, I'm trying to find out about Islam. You know, I want to understand what the beliefs are and how it works and everything. And then I became Akbar gave me a translation of Natural Balagha, and I liked the character of Imam Ali alayhi salam as it was presented there, because it showed somebody who was a very multifaceted person. I mean, he was concerned with the political affairs of his day. He had problems with Muawiyah and all of this kind of stuff. And at the same time, he was had really deep insights into spirituality and mysticism even, and it was poetic as well. So it was like, this was really incredible to me, that here's a person who's engaged, has very high moral qualities, a deep sense of spirituality, and a sense of responsibility towards his community. So this was really fascinating for me. So from the very beginning, when I started thinking about becoming a Muslim, at first, I mean, for some years when I started studying about it, I had no intention to become a Muslim at all, because at that time I had no belief in God. So I thought, you know, it's impossible for me to become a Muslim, because you have to believe in God to become a Muslim, and I don't believe in God, so it can't work. But this was this attitude and the character of Imam Ali alayhi salam was very attractive for me, and I thought this was a good model for somebody to have in his life. But I thought, I remember at that time, I thought, you know, if this guy is really such a wonderful model to have, and he believes in God, then maybe there's some way that you can find to believe in God again, you know. so then I started thinking, and especially at that time, I also started reading some stories from the Urfa, things from Molavi and Attar and stuff like this. And the conception that I got of God from reading those kind of sources was much more satisfying. I mean, I had been thinking of God all the time as some guy up there behind the clouds making decisions about what's going to go on in the world. But the idea of God that I found in the Urfa and then later in Islamic philosophy was much deeper than this. And so I thought, well, maybe the problem with my belief in God was that I was rejecting a kind of childish view, a childish conception of God. And what Islam is really presenting is something much deeper than that. And that's how I finally was able to reconcile myself to belief in God. But that was the hardest thing for me. I mean, I liked Islam, especially I liked the Shia Islam. I had lots of friends, Muslims, both Sunni and Shia. And so I liked it, you know, and I agreed with a lot of the things. But this belief in God was the last step for me.
So it's interesting. So you became Muslim before you believe in God.
Yeah. It's like I became Muslim before I believed in God.
And the first insight towards the deep reading about Islam, it was the Nahj al-Balagha of Imam Ali, which was the path towards knowing Islam and all the tradition more.
Yeah, I mean, I bought when I started, I bought a copy of a translation of the Quran. It was not a very good translation. And I read it very quick, and I couldn't understand what was going on. I mean, I just didn't understand how it works at all. But then I had some Iranian friends, and they invited me to come. They had a meeting every week about the Quran. And of course, the meetings were in Persian, and I didn't know any Persian at the time. But I went to the meetings anyway, and I tried to pick up a little bit. And I got the idea. What they were doing was they would read like two ayat of the Quran, and then spend the rest of the hour and a half or something just talking about what every word in that means and comparing different tafsir. And that was interesting for me. Then I thought, I've been looking at the Quran the wrong way. I'm trying to read it like a novel, but it's not. It's a collection of signs that can lead you, that can help to guide you towards God. And so that was another big breakthrough for me. That figuring out how to understand the Quran.
And Doctor, you mentioned that the first insight for you towards Islam was the revolution and the Muslim people that were talking about the revolution. So what about the personality of Imam Khomeini also? Did you find it a very spiritual, mystical leader, or it has an impact on your personality in the beginning?
Yeah. When I soon after I became Muslim, I was invited to come to Iran for the 10 days of dawn, the anniversary of the revolution. It was the 6th anniversary of the revolution. And they took us to see Imam Khomeini give a speech. And it was a whole lot of people, and I thought, what am I doing here? You know, I don't understand the language, and here I'm in the middle of all these people. But Well, see, so I went, and there was some Indian man standing next to me, and he said to me, "You don't understand Persian, do you?" I said, "No." He said, "It's okay, I'll translate for you." And he translated the whole speech for me, just like that. And it was wonderful, wonderful. And the speech was so interesting to me. I don't remember the details now, but what I remember of it was that he, in the speech, he referred to some story in the Quran. I think it was about Hazrat Musa alayhi salam. And when he explained it, he was speaking at several different levels at the same time. So there was this big audience, and he explained what the story is saying in the Quran in a way that even a child could understand. But he also made a few comments about the spiritual significance of these verses, which, if somebody's paying attention, is really deep thinking behind it. But just a few indications, and he also draws out some political lessons to learn from this as well. And this was really interesting to me, because I thought Imam is a real follower. He's a real follower of Imam Ali, because he's also able to combine in his personality this kind of common man, khaki kind of approach to things, and at the same time show that he's paying attention to the deeper philosophical, theological, mystical issues, and at the same time being engaged in the political questions of the day. And there's a kind of synthesis between among all of these different facets. So I thought it was really, really interesting.
So it's like that you found a small manifestation of Imam Ali, which is manifested in Imam Khomeini.
Yeah.
Especially, Doctor, about the contradictions that are found in such personalities, that is very fascinating. You find politics and mysticism, you find zuhd, and you find knowledge, and you find many different aspects.
Yeah.
Doctor, going back to Imam Ali, so you completed and continued studying Nahj al-Balagha, because also you have an article about Irfan Amir al-Mu'mineen, mysticism in Imam Ali. So you continued having inspirations with Nahj al-Balagha after you became Muslim and after you continued your academic path?
Yeah, not only Nahj al-Balagha, but other collections of narrations. Since I came to Qom, I've been really blessed to have found good friends who were patient enough to sit down with me and help me struggle through the Arabic and try to understand some of the Hadith literature. So I had some friends, for example, who sat with me, and we read through the entire Tawhid-e-Saduq. And this takes a long time. I mean, it took us several years to do this with two different friends, because they had to read every line, then explain it to me in Persian, and then I explain what I understand from it in English. But somehow this was very, very valuable for me.
And what about your friendship with Ayatollah Mosbah Yazdi, that you had from the beginning meetings about philosophy and religion and ethics, and you were able to learn from him different things? And
yeah, I'm extremely grateful to Ayatollah Mosbah. He was immediately receptive to me when I first met him, which was in New York, actually. At that time, I was at the Iranian mission to the United Nations one day, visiting Dr. Kharazi, who was the Iranian ambassador to the UN at that time. And I had told Dr. Kharazi that I wanted to go to Iran and study about Islamic philosophy. And he said to me, well, he said, there's a man here who should be interesting for you is Ayatollah Misbah. I had no idea who he was, but he said, he's a philosopher, and maybe you could cooperate or something. So I met Ayatollah Misbah, and I told him my story very briefly, and he said, that's wonderful. He said, come to Qom and work with us. And I said, okay, and but then I didn't have any more contact with him. So, but then when I came to Iran, I was invited to come to Iran officially by Anjuman Hikmat wa Falsafe, the Academy of Philosophy in Tehran. And I had a friend, a Iraqi guy who wanted to get married. So he asked me to go with him for to make a proposal to this girl who was living in Qom at the time. She was Iraqi refugee living in Qom. And when I was in Qom, somebody who worked for Ayatollah Misbah saw me on the street. He knew me because he attended some of my lectures, and he arranged a meeting for me to see Ayatollah Misbah again. And then Ayatollah Misbah invited me again to come and work. At that time, there was no Muassasa Imam Khomeini. It was Bunyad Baghr Ulum. And so I started coming to Qom once a week and teaching Western philosophy at Bunyad Baghr Ulum. And then that increased. And then when the Imam Khomeini Education and Research Institute was begun, I was from the very beginning involved with this.
And later on, regarding the theoretical and theories and Islamic knowledge, Islamic ethics, and all the theories that you think about. So you share with the Ayatollah Mosbah meetings where you discuss such deep concepts together and gain from each other?
Yeah, it's again, it's a great blessing that I've been able to have these ongoing discussions with him, which started because of this program that they wanted to put for television, where we had some discussions of epistemology and Islamic philosophy. And these were discussions in which I participated along with Ayatollah Misbah, Alai Fayazi, Dr. Ahmad Ahmadi was there some of the time, Professor Malakian, Larajani was in some of these meetings. Anyway, so we had so we started having these meetings, and they were really, really interesting meetings to me. Because each of the people who were involved was approaching the issues in a somewhat different way, especially me, because I was the issues were all framed in the context of Islamic philosophy. So, for example, they would ask me, what do they say in the West about etibariyat? We don't even have the concept of etibariyat in Western philosophy, but there are some things that are comparable. And so this opened up a way to start to have discussion. And I thought this was really fascinating. Most of the time when you do comparative philosophy in the West, the framework is always Western philosophy, or else there's some texts. So, for example, you'll read Confucius, and then you want to compare it with Western ethics. So the framework that you have for looking at Confucius is Western ethics. And then you try to go through the text and find out things that are relevant to the problems. But this was the reverse. Here we were starting with a framework in Islamic philosophy, and then trying to look at what kind of things are there in the Western tradition that can address some of the questions that come up in Islamic philosophy. And that was interesting to me. That was interesting. So when I first, I translated with a friend this آموزش فلسفه philosophical instructions from Ayatollah Misbah. And when I first read the book, I thought of all these many, many, many objections that could be raised to it. And I was thinking, how can anybody think that this is correct? There's all these objections that come up. But over the course of the period when I was doing this, I started asking him personally questions or through some of his students. And I found that most of the time, the way that I was thinking of the questions was different from the way that they were conceived in the Islamic tradition. And so there was a kind of misunderstanding that arises because of the conceptual background that's involved. And this came up time and time again. So many times I found that there's a apparent difference of opinion about something, but when you look more deeply at it, you find that there are deeper conceptual differences involved in these issues. But I still think that this was a very useful way to do comparative philosophy. And then after several years, this series for the TV meetings went on for several years. And once that was finished, I began having just personal meetings with Ayatollah Misbah to kind of continue in the same manner. So he would pick a topic. For example, one of the topics we talked about was science and religion. So, and he has a book by this title as well. So I read through the book, and every week I would talk to him about related ideas in Western philosophy, and he would try to explain how he looks at the same kinds of issues. And we did this with a number of different topics, on everything from ethical questions to some theological questions, and
he was always open to listen and understand and gain knowledge or wisdom if it was there in the Western philosophy, and his personality is open to such kind of comparative studies.
Oh yeah, I mean that's that was the vision that he had for the founding of the Imam Khomeini Education and Research Institute in the first place. The idea was that we should train some of the tulab, some of the young clergy that they should be enrolled in the Jose, and they should have good background in the studies in the madrasa, but at the same time, they should come and study English, and they should pick some field of concentration in the humanities or social sciences. So in the institute, we have people studying economics, psychology, education, philosophy, of course, and a number of other humanities and social sciences, also some Islamic studies as well, like Quranic studies. And that also proved to be very interesting, very fruitful.
Doctor, regarding your personal spiritual life, have you gone through a certain religious experience, or mostly your joy is in intellectual and conceptual thinking about the topics of Islam?
No, I mean, well, I'll tell you, mostly I really like the intellectual part of it. This has tremendous attraction to me. But at the same time, the intellectual problems that arise in the philosophy of religion, I see more as puzzles in a way. So they're interesting things, and they can help you to gain a deeper understanding of what our religious commitments are. But the religious life is much more than this. You know, the religious life has to do with your own the way that you relate to God, and this is a interesting topic. He's been extremely open and encouraging of his students to engage with different kind of issues that come up in the Western tradition as well as...
Doctor, about the question about your religious life and that you found it interesting. I asked you about religious experience, and then you told me about it's about the religious life that a person lives. So you were talking something in that context.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is mostly for me. It comes in prayer, you know, in the life of prayer and worship, and in trying to adjust your attitude and life to being a better servant of God.
Mm-hmm.
But this is, you know, this is not something so easy to explain. I mean, this is just, it's easier to talk about philosophy.
Doctor, many Western thinkers or philosophers who approach Islam or approach very deep Islamic thought were fascinated by the Sufi and the mystical tradition. So, for example, Henry Corbin or Toshiko Izutsu or Massignon or many others, they find the Sufi or the mystical dimension of Islam most interesting. So what's the reason beyond that? And do you personally find this dimension of Islam a field of attraction and beauty?
Yes. The mystical traditions of Islam are many and varied. Of course, usually when people talk about Irfan and Azari, it's always the school of Ibn Arabi. And Ibn Arabi, of course, is a towering figure and very important, but there's much more to it. I remember once I had a conversation with somebody when I was still living in Tehran. And they asked me, you know, whether I was interested in Irfan and Sufism and all of this stuff. And I said, yeah, it's really interesting to me because it's all over in Iran. It's everywhere. Everywhere you look, there are references to the Sufi and mystical tradition. And the man who I was talking with was an Iranian. He said, "What do you mean with that? That's not true." They said, "We're not so much focused on that." And I said, "Yeah, turn on the radio. You turn on the radio and somebody's singing a poem from one of the Sufi poets. And if you look at the artwork and the architecture, it's all influenced by Sufi traditions. And so there's a lot to be found in it. But I think lots of times people have a very narrow idea of mysticism or of Irfan or Sufism as being connected with a specific maktab. For example, you should be in the line of Ibn Arabi, or you should belong to some Sufi order, or some kind of thing like this. But in a much more general sense, I think it's more pervasive. So especially when you look at art and architecture and poetry, you find these kind of ideas.
You refer many times to the poems of Al-Attar and Al-Rumi and Al-Hafid in your articles also.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of maybe of the great and the deep meanings that this tradition has.
Yeah.
So yeah, my question is that in your articles you refer many times to the Attar and Rumi poems. So because you find in these poems the deep meanings of the ideas that you want to express, that's why you mentioned them.
I don't know whether they're ideas that I would want to express, but I like their poetry, and it's suggestive, you know. So what you find in poetry all the time is it's not explicit theological positions that are taken, but suggestions. So, and especially connected with emotional attraction and kind of inward experience. So you find these kind of suggestions, and I found even before I became Muslim, I started reading some of these stories from the poetry of Molavi and Attar, and it's I find it really fascinating. And this is it's been fascinating for Westerners from the very beginning when they started translating these things into Western languages. So there's nothing unusual. There's the kind of depth of spiritual meaning that you find in Islamic poetry is not matched in the Western tradition, and that's why a lot of Western authors and thinkers have been attracted to it.
Doctor, you mentioned that when you were young, your first book that you read it was about philosophy. And what do you think now about the calls for teaching philosophy for children and including it in the educational systems? Is it available? So could we like have some systems for children to learn philosophy from the beginning?
I think it depends on the children. So I don't think that all the children are going to be attracted to philosophy. So I would not recommend making philosophy a required course for all of the children. But some of the children are interested in asking questions and trying to find deeper ideas about the things that they're questioning about, the meaning of life and how the world works and How do we
I
know
mean,
things?
presenting philosophical ideas in a very easy and a simple way, and that in a way that is ملائم, or it's good for their age and their mental abilities.
Yeah, yeah. But again, I think it depends on the child. So I wouldn't try to shove philosophy down anybody's throat. But for the young people who express or show an interest, it's good for this kind of discussion at a elementary level to be made available. It's one thing that I think could be useful for children generally would be to learn basic logic. I think that there's a great need for there to be more concentration on teaching logical thinking.
Doctor, when talking about philosophy or philosophy of religion, philosophers say that knowledge is related also with perplexity, confusion, wonder, Hira, الدهشة, and so among all the different stuff that you read and study in philosophy of religion, comparative religion, and Islamic philosophy, is there a certain topic that you recap where you study it with joy and you feel that you're fully involved with your spiritual and mental capacities when you read such a topic? Is there a topic that you remember or recap that you enjoy studying, for example, more than others?
Well, that's hard to say. You know, I really enjoy philosophy generally, and even the areas of philosophy that I don't like. Once I start studying them more, I usually find that I really enjoy them as well. So, for example, when I was in graduate school, I did not like philosophy of religion, and I did not like ethics. And these are the two areas that I'm concentrating on the most these days. But I remember once I was talking with another graduate student, and I said to him, this ethics, it's all just, it doesn't have any firm foundations, and people are just throwing ideas around, and it really bugs me. I can't get a handle on it. And he said to me, well, what about epistemology? Do you like epistemology? And I said, oh yeah, epistemology, that's analytic, it's very precise, that's good. And he said, well, all the same problems that occur in epistemology, you can find similar problems in ethics, and the reverse. And this was a key for me to the approach to understanding ethics better, that I kept on making comparisons with epistemology.
Doctor, regarding ethics, due to your experience in Western philosophy, can we find doctrines and theories similar to what we have in our ethical systems in the Arba'un Hadith of Imam Khomeini, or the Baha'i, or the Fayd al-Kashani, for example? Because some people, when they study the philosophy of ethics in Kant ideas, that one must do what is right for its own sake and not because of any expected benefit. I think some may say that there is a similar approach in Islam, where you obey God or be virtuous out of love for God rather than anything else. And this is what is called عبادة المحبين of Imam Ali. So you act in accord of high motivation, free from any ego or interest or paying attention to any benefit in this world or the afterworld, but your only benefit is the nearest to God. So such comparisons can be done?
Yes, of course. And this is a very interesting comparison. It's a wonderful example that you've chosen here, because there's similarities as well as differences. So what's the emotion behind the the following of God for his own sake, of somebody who's not just doing it because they're afraid of the punishment or something like this. For the one who's the true believer who gets to a high level, what's his motivation? What motivates him to obey God? What's the motivation? What's the emotion? For the one who's at the high level and just doing what's right.
I think love, I think like
yes, exactly. Yes, it's love. But that's not what it is for Kant. So what is it for Kant? For Kant, it's respect. Respect for what? Not respect for God. Respect for the law that our own intellects are able to discover. So for Kant, what should motivate the pure will, a will that does when somebody does their duty only because it's their duty, it's because they respect the law that determines that duty. Whereas for the Urfa and some of the Muslim philosophers, what motivates is love for God. And I think that's an interesting comparison. I don't think that they're necessarily contradictory to each other. Maybe they're complementary in some way, but they're not the same. They're similar, but they're different as well. And this is where the interesting part comes, to examine why they're different, why they're similar, what's the background of these ideas.
So, for example, there is something missing in Kant's theory here, or the Urfa present a more deeper idea about why we're doing a certain thing. Because he says following the rule, but can we say that Kant also means that following the rule because our fitra, our innate feeling says follow this rule? So it is somewhere similar that you're doing the act without any ego, without any interest.
Yeah, you're doing it without any ego and without any interest.
Just
but
because to do it.
Kant is not using the idea of fitra. What he's using is the idea of
neither God,
of reason. So the idea in Kant is that there are principles of reason that apply to all intelligent beings without exception, even angels. So it's not just because of the human nature that this moral law comes. It's because of the very nature of reason itself. And this is a very strong and controversial claim. I'm not really convinced by Kant that he's right about this, but it's an interesting idea anyway.
And Kant doesn't relate the action with God, that it should satisfy God or reach to the closeness of God or something?
Yes, he does. Kant says that what we should do is we're morally obliged to consider all of our moral duties to be commands of God. So, when we do our duty out of respect for the law, we are in so doing that, we are being obedient to God. This is Kant's.
So within Kant's context and doctrine, his spiritual understanding of ethics is based on his philosophy. So it's a presentation of a spiritual theory. We can say that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Great. Doctor, I would like to go to another topic, and I'll focus on a certain issues because it's a very wide and complicated issue, which is the issue of religious pluralism, and you've wrote about that. But I want to ask you, we'll start here, that we as Muslims, we find levels of wisdom and truth that exist among other religions different than Islam. but we argue that the Islam is the most beautiful image. So is there a path toward reaching to very high levels of closeness to God and real spirituality for other people if they were very sincere, if they were looking for truth and they seek reaching towards God? So maybe God will open paths for other people to reach towards Him even if they were not Muslims?
Yeah, you have to understand that the followers of the other religions ask the same thing. So Catholics, for example, they think that they have the true guidance from God. And then the question arises for them is, do you think it's possible for Muslims also to actually be guided by God, even though they don't accept Christ in the same way that the Catholics do? And so you have all of these kind of these issues occur. We always, from each denomination, we're always concerned to promote or to testify to the correctness or the truth of our own path. But that shouldn't blind us to recognition that similar things or analogous things occur in different traditions.
But the question here, Doctor, that is God's mercy won't be, or God's doors won't be closed for sincere people that will that are trying to reach towards Him. This is my question exactly. Or for example, what is mentioned in the story of Moses and the shepherd, Musa wa Shaban, when he mentions there that God looks at the pure hearts of people who seek a path towards Him sincerely, no matter what their zahir is.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I use that story many times when I'm talking with people about religious pluralism. So I think that people can even people who have views that I take to be completely false. I believe that God can show His mercy on those people and find some way to guide them, even through their false beliefs.
How come so He'll guide them through false beliefs? He has His own way?
Yeah, God has His own way. God has, there's a story I like about this that I found in a language book once. There was the story is that there was a man who traveled from someplace in Germany to the Netherlands, and when he went to Holland, he didn't understand the language, and he went and he saw a very big house, and he asked the people, whose house is this? And they responded to him, and they said, I don't understand, because they didn't understand his language. And he thought that nicht verstehen, I don't understand, was the name of the person who owned the house. And then he saw that he went to the harbor, and he saw that there was a ship being unloaded with lots of cargo. And he said, oh, who owns this ship with all this cargo? And the person he asked didn't understand what he said, so he also said, I don't understand. And he thought, oh, it's the same person who owned that house. His name is, I don't understand. And then he went to he saw that there was a funeral. So he decided to join the funeral party and say a prayer for the one who died. And then he asked, who is it that died? And again, they didn't understand. So they said, I don't understand. And he said, oh, it's the same person. The same one who owns the house and who had the ship. It shows that all of this worldly wealth that we acquire. It's not worth anything in the end because we're all going to die finally. So here's a perfect example of somebody who, by making several mistakes, ended up arriving at a deep truth. And I think that God can guide people in this kind of way as well.
Very interesting. Doctor, we have also this wisdom or saying which says there are as many paths to God as there are human breaths. If you'd like to comment, or how do you understand it?
Yeah, everybody has their own way to approach God. Everybody has their own different emotional background, intellectual background. And I don't think this is something that's peculiar only to religion. Even in terms of our family relations, the relation that I have to my father is unique. I had a very special relation to my father. I'm sure you have a different, but also very special relation to your father as well. I mean, I picked the example of relation to father because it's so common. And yet, each one is unique. And I think there's something very similar that goes on in our religious life as well. It involves our relationships, our commitments, our emotions, and these are all unique to every person.
Can we say, Doctor, it is the path of instinct, fitra, which is very deeply inside every human being?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. There's, you know, there's another story that I like very much of Charles Sanders Peirce. Charles Sanders Peirce was a pragmatist philosopher in America, and he was not known for being very religious. But he said that if anybody can go out on a dark night into the woods and look up at the stars in the sky and not feel awe of God, that person has a cold heart. And this, I think, is speaking to this concept of fitra. And it comes up also in other places in Peirce's writings that it's not just that a few people have this. This is a very common experience that human beings have, that they feel a deep need within themselves to show thanks. I think that this is one of the best indications of the existence of God, is that we find it in this need that we have within ourselves to show thanks, because there's nothing that is deserving of the kind of thanks that we need to show except for the Supreme Being.
I think, Doctor, you also mentioned in several articles that there are materialistic philosophers, but you find them very virtuous and very believing in ethics and morality, and they are virtuous in their personal and social life. So that there is another dimension which reflects the fitra side in their personality, even though they are materialistic in thinking.
Yeah, well, again, because of my own background, you know, I feel a lot of sympathy towards the atheists, because for many years I also had no belief in God at all. And so I don't think that we should look at the atheist as the enemy of religious belief. The atheist is typically rejecting a kind of childish religious belief that we also should try to go beyond. And I keep on finding, this is one of the topics I find very interesting in the philosophy of religion. Usually, when the atheists talk about God, they give a definition of God as in a very anthropomorphic sense. And this is something that's rather childish. And I think that in a more mature kind of conception of God, we can find that there's room for atheistic ideas as well.
Doctor, and then do you believe that other traditions and other religions may have things that Islam lack? So, for example, I think you also mentioned things about the Mennonite church, and you have worked on this issue. For example, they talk about the radical discipleship, which is trying to separate yourself from the world. So my question is that we can find some very beautiful or deep wisdom outside the Islamic tradition. This could be possible?
Of course, because what makes a tradition is its history. And each of these religious denominations have their own history, and they've gone through their own struggles. And that's what colors these doctrines. So when you talk with the Mennonites about radical discipleship, I mean, the first thing that a lot of people, a lot of Muslims will do is they'll say, oh, we have that too. We have something like that too. So there's, but that's again, I think that's a childish way to look at the issue. What we should try to do is, instead of trying to say that, yeah, we have everything, it's there's nothing that we have to learn from anybody else. No, instead we should try to be more open to understand how people from different traditions have come to their positions, and then we can find analogies within our own traditions, and by contemplating about those similarities and differences that we have with the traditions, our own understandings will be deepened.
Doctor, also, so what about the concept of guiding others? I think you have here a certain opinion, because do you believe that each religious person should promote and advertise what he believes true, or no, it's an issue about knowing others and trying to know them?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing before you can, I mean, there's a kind of game in debating. So we can have debates with people, and I've engaged in this kind of stuff too. So it has its own place. We can try to trip up somebody else where we pose questions for them that they find it difficult to answer, and they can do the same thing with us. And you can train yourself with this and become a better debater about this. But I don't think that this kind of approach to tabligh is one that really brings you to a deep understanding of religion. Now, there are some people who are ready to accept Islam because of what's going on in their personal life. And if you approach them in a friendly way and try to show them that there's a place within the Islamic community for these people, they will accept Islam. And it's not about, you don't have to go to a Christian and tell them that 3 is not the same as 1, so you should become a Muslim or something like this. I mean, that's a kind of childish approach to this kind of thing. But I think that much more important is to try to gain understanding. And this is also something that I learned from Ayatollah Mosbah. Once when I was getting ready to go to the US in the summer, and I was going to talk at some churches and things like this, and I asked Ayatollah Mosbah, what should I say, or Is there any topic in particular that I should focus on? And he said to me, you know, when you do tabligh, don't think that it means that you're getting other people to sign up and say the Shahadatain. The most important thing is for the other ones to understand what Islam is about. And whether they accept Islam or they don't accept Islam, that's another issue. But the task that we have is to try to express what we understand of Islam in the best way, and to understand what their own religious life is like as well. So we have so many people who have the idea of, okay, I know a whole bunch of hadiths and I've memorized a whole bunch of ayah from Quran, I'm ready to do tabligh, and go out and just talk to people and not listen. This is not a good way to do tabligh. If we want to do tabligh, we should also be ready to listen. Listen to the spiritual problems that other people have, to commiserate with them, to try to understand what's bothering them. If they don't like Islam, what is it about Islam that they don't like? And most of the time it turns out, you know, it's things like terrorism and closed-mindedness and stuff like that, which, the Muslims don't like these kind of things either. So if we can get to a point where instead of the dynamic shouldn't be that I approach the other person and say, I've got the truth, you listen to me and accept it or not. This is a very bad kind of approach. But if instead what we do is we say, all right, I've gone through my life and have the kind of a spiritual way that I've led, and I suspect that you have as well. And let's compare our notes of what we've done on the journey and see whether we can learn from one another. And I think this is much more productive.
So, Doctor, like you mean, do you believe that learning about other religions enable a religious person to understand his religion and faith in a proper way and be more aware of it?
Yeah, I'll tell you another story. We had two friends, Mennonite friends, Wally and Evie Schellenberger. And we took them to Isfahan one time. And Evie was talking with a bunch of girls, and they had very nice conversation with one another. And these girls, they really liked Evie a lot. And they said to Evie, oh, you're such a nice person. Why aren't you Muslim? And Evie said, well, she said, I want to learn about Islam so that I can be a better Christian. And I think that's a kind of universal thing. Yes, I want to learn about Christianity and Buddhism or whatever so that I can be a better Muslim.
Very interesting, very interesting. So, Doctor, you talked about fitra, and you talked about learning from other religions to be a better religious person. So the issue of faith, normally in the houses, in the academia, in the lectures, it is presented by a conceptual belief system. So this is always this contradiction. Is faith a conceptual belief system, علم حصولي, thinking, or is it a spiritual experience, virtual life, acting in the proper way? So what's more here? Because I'll quote from an article which says, what about a farmer picking blueberries, a gacho riding his horse, a musician playing her instrument, the warm body of a loved one? Is reality limited to the noble and rational? Water is reduced to its chemical profile. This is a reality thought, but reality lived is when water is loved for what is it. So my question is that Quran also speaks to the heart, and talks about iman, not only beliefs. So this issue about the believing system and about the virtual, spiritual, active life of faith.
Yeah, this. Let me go back to another question that you had earlier about interest in Irfan and the fact that Henry Corbin and lots of other people were interested in this. You know, I have a problem with Corbin and some of the people who are promoting Irfani kind of approach to Islam. That oftentimes it seems to me that they neglect the rational aspect of it. For me, what was most attractive about Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam was his ability to blend together the rational and the emotional, the political and the spiritual. All of these things could fit together. And I think also in our spiritual life, the heart is very much important, but we shouldn't see it as there's a conflict between the heart and the head, or is our faith, does it consist of feelings that we have, or does it consist of how we approach in a rational way what our belief system consists of? It involves all of these things. And the trick is to try to put it together in a coherent way. Now, problems occur when there's an overemphasis on just one aspect. So sometimes in the Jose, you might find that, yeah, there's too much emphasis just on learning the Kalami kind of positions. What's our answer to the attributes of God and stuff like this? But that doesn't mean that those things aren't important. They're really important and they're interesting too. But it's not the whole thing. That's not what faith is all about. And especially if you want to talk about faith as it is, as it's discussed in early Islam, in the Quran and Hadith, so this is it involves a practical aspect as well.
So we shouldn't limit faith to belief system. Faith has its own applications, but sometimes in the Hausa they say that beliefs are these, and then the action side is another thing. It's an extra thing that you study in akhlaq or you study in fiqh. So this is they split the things. This is my question.
Yeah, I disagree with that kind of approach. You know, I think that I mean, the people that I know who are also teaching in the Jose, many of them, they don't take this kind of approach. And they're much more, they have a much more comprehensive view about what the religious life is about.
Doctor, it's not about neglecting the role of reason and logic. It's about having an enhanced reason, if we can say, like a guided reason, like the form of reason which focuses on practice also, where the essence of a person is also ethical and virtual, and then a deeper type of reason, which is no longer seeking knowledge about the world, but the world becomes a reflection of knowledge also, like العلم الوجودي or العلم الحضوري, that he's having another level of reasoning the things. اللهم أرني الأشياء كما هي. He wants to relate the things to God, see things as signs of God. So
that's like the basic goal in Irfan is that we should try to train ourselves in such a way that we can understand all things as signs of God. And this is Irfan in its most general sense. I mean, regardless of what you think about Wahdat al-Wujud and the particular teachings and things, but what's generally agreed upon is that we should try to bring ourselves to an understanding whereby we're able to understand all things as being signs of God, as being manifestations of God.
Doctor, from all your experience in Islamic spirituality and ethics, regarding the current time, where we find different illnesses of modernism, such as drug addiction, loneliness, violence, and lack of meaning. A virtue seeker who wants his soul to reach to very high levels, what can the Islamic school of ethics and spirituality present him with solutions? So what's the main solution that we can offer a person that he faces all these illnesses of modernity?
Yeah, I don't think that the problems that you mentioned, the moral problems or feelings of loneliness and alienation and this kind of thing, are only to be found in modernity. I think that if we look, I think they're much more universal. So I think that when we look at the riwayat, the narrations that we have from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and from the Masumin, we find that there's lots of times when they're talking with ordinary people or trying to help people who are in difficult situations. Sometimes in the narrations, this is very much idealized, but the basic thing is that they were reaching out to people, trying to help people who had difficulties. And I think that the answer is not to say, oh, we should reject some ideas that have become prevalent with the modern times. I mean, this is a philosophical issue and it has interests of its own, but that's not what's going to solve the problems in the society. What's going to solve the problems in the society is people acting on what they believe in, the society. So there's too much people just talking about, oh, why are we in this situation that we're in? And there needs to be more people who are willing to put it into practice.
Doctor, I will conclude with a question about Imam Khomeini's Irfan and what you find the value added or something very fundamental in his Irfanic thoughts, if you'd like to present. After reading a prayer which Imam Khomeini ends his 40 hadiths, 40 hadithan with, and you translated this prayer in English. So he says, "O God, who has illuminated the hearts of awliya with the light of love, and cleared the tongues of the lovers of your beauty from the taints of egoism, and has placed your majesty beyond the reach of self-seeking riches. Awaken us from the intoxication of worldly delusion, and deliver us from the heavy slumber of nature, and remove with your gesture the thick curtains and obstructing veils of egotism and self-seeking." This is a very nice prayer of Imam Khomeini. My question for you, you're very familiar with Imam Khomeini books, especially the Arfani ones. So what do you find very major or fundamental in his Irfan, which you'd like to talk about in the end of this interview?
Ethics. I think that this passage that you quoted also is a good example of the moral dimension of Imam's view of Irfan. So he's talking about getting rid of egoism, getting rid of worldly attachments. These are the things that make people behave in unethical ways. People are drawn to shady kinds of business deals, and all kinds of immoral things because they have the wrong kind of motivations. And what Imam's Irfan is focusing on, most of all, as I understand it, is how to remake yourself in such a way that you're not going to be pulled down by the kind of motivations that lead to unethical behavior.
Great, great. So he's emphasizing very much on the role of ethics in the human being life.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Doctor, for all the insights and the information and the knowledge you offered us in this very long interview, and interesting about your personal life, about religious pluralism, about faith, and about Irfan. Thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Sorry about all of the technical problems that we had.